Dad didn't lower his voice when he said it. He pushed the envelope across the table like a trophy and told me, "We gave your wedding fund to your sister. She deserves a real wedding." The room froze. My mother nodded, my sister smiled. I didn't cry, I just looked at my fiancé. And when he rose from his chair, pulled out his phone and said, "Should I tell them what I do for a living?" That smile disappeared so fast, it felt like someone cut the power. But the truth didn't begin at that table. I grew up in a house where love always had a spotlight, and somehow it never landed on me for long. My parents believed in achievement the way some families believe in religion: measured, displayed, worshipped. The dining room walls were proof. Every frame held a milestone from my sister's life: her debate trophies, her college acceptance, her first promotion. My memories lived in the shadows between those frames, quiet and uncelebrated. I learned early how to move through that house without expecting much. I kept my head down, built a small career of my own as a freelance designer, and pretended I didn't notice how often conversations drifted back to the daughter who made them proud. It wasn't jealousy. It was the ache of being half visible in the place that raised me. The only one who saw me fully was the woman who lived just across the hall from my childhood room, my grandmother. She'd press warm cookies into my hands and say the sweetness was for balance because the world wasn't always fair. She gave softness to a life that often felt like sandpaper. My fiancé met her before he met anyone else in my family. He showed up in a simple sweater and worn jeans, a kindness in his eyes my grandmother recognized instantly. They talked for an hour that first day. When he left, she squeezed my arm and whispered, "He's steadier than he looks." She was right. He never tried to impress. He just showed up with a quiet strength I didn't know I needed. My parents didn't see any of that. To them, his simplicity meant insufficiency. They asked vague questions about his job, but only in the way someone checks a box they've already decided is empty. When he didn't elaborate, they wrote their own story: that he lacked ambition, that he wasn't on her level. They never asked what level I wanted to be on. As the wedding season crept closer, the tension thickened. My sister could barely contain her excitement as she listed venues, menus, deposits already paid. My parents nodded with the warm approval I'd chased for years. I watched from the edge of the conversation, pretending the knot in my stomach was just stress. My grandmother noticed. She always did. One afternoon, while trimming the roses in her small backyard, she said, "Sometimes the loudest rooms have the least truth in them." I didn't understand then, but I would. Everything, the favoritism, the imbalance, the cracks in our family, was leading to that Sunday dinner, the night my fiancé stood up and the truth finally stepped into the light. The weeks after that dinner tightened around me like a slow, deliberate squeeze. Every conversation in my family circled back to my sister's wedding, her venue tours, her dress fittings, the deposits she'd confidently placed. My parents repeated the phrase, "a real wedding," so often it began to sound like a judgment carved into stone. I tried to let it wash over me, but each mention felt like another small hand pushing me out of my own life. My father didn't help. He'd glance at my fiancé with the polite smile people use when they're sure they're being generous. "Stability matters," he said once, stirring his coffee like the rhythm steadied him. "You two should think carefully before making commitments you can't sustain." It was framed as advice, but the message was clear. He didn't believe we could stand on our own. He didn't believe I could build anything lasting with a man who didn't parade his accomplishments. My sister absorbed all of this with bright, oblivious joy. She'd sit on the couch describing floral arrangements, her excitement spilling over while my parents leaned in, hanging on every word. I stayed quiet, hands folded in my lap, wondering how a family could make room for one daughter so effortlessly and leave the other pressed against the walls. The turning point came at the airport. My grandmother had been invited, or at least we believed she had, to join them on a short celebratory trip. She dressed carefully that morning, smoothing her blouse with a hopefulness that made my throat tighten. But at the check-in counter, the agent frowned, typed a few times, and said, "There's no reservation under her name." My parents exchanged quick glances, the kind that last only a second but say everything. My sister stared at her phone. My grandmother's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her bag strap. Maybe there's a mistake, she whispered. But there wasn't. There was never a seat for her. She wasn't part of their plan. Humiliation settles differently when it lands on someone you love. It's heavier, more personal. I felt it hit me like a physical weight. My parents offered excuses, mix-ups, misunderstandings, oversights, but none of them reached her eyes. She simply nodded, thanked the agent, and stepped aside with a dignity sharper than any apology they could offer. I stood next to her, silent. I didn't cry then either. I just looked at my fiancé. The airport noise faded to a hum behind us. Something in his expression changed. Quiet anger, steady purpose. And that was the moment I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. My grandmother didn't say a word on the drive home. She sat straight, hands folded in her lap, staring out the window as the city blurred by. Every few minutes, she gave a small nod as if agreeing with a thought only she could hear. When we pulled into her driveway, she thanked us with a soft smile that cracked something in me. She moved slowly, carefully, as though her disappointment weighed more than her bones could carry. Inside, the house smelled like lavender and old books. She went straight to the garden door, opened it, and stepped onto the small patio. I watched from the threshold as she knelt among her roses, touching each stem as though apologizing for having left them even just for a morning. The quiet around her felt fragile, like a room where someone had just received bad news but hadn't spoken it aloud. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "They didn't forget me, Anna. They decided I wasn't necessary." She pulled a wilted leaf from a stem, her hands gentle. People reveal themselves in small choices. That was a choice. I sat beside her knees in the dirt. I didn't try to defend anyone. There was nothing left to defend. Later that evening, while she brewed tea, I opened my laptop. A familiar thought dragged me forward. Someone needed to protect her, even if that someone had never been me before. I searched everything I could find about financial mistreatment of elders. The more I read, the definitions, the red flags, the examples, the more a painful clarity settled. It wasn't just the forgotten ticket. It was the way my parents talked about her savings, the way my sister joked about reallocating resources, the way decisions were made around her instead of with her. All the pieces slid quietly into place. Where Liam walked in, he paused behind me, reading over my shoulder. "You think they've crossed that line?" he asked softly. "I think they erased it long ago," I replied. My voice surprised me. It wasn't shaking, it wasn't unsure. He rested a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "Then we don't wait for them to do it again." The next day, we met with someone who specialized in protecting older adults. She listened carefully, asked precise questions, and didn't flinch when I described the airport. When she outlined our options, my parents looked relaxed, sun-warmed, chatting about restaurants they liked. My sister walked slightly ahead, scrolling through photos on her phone, probably already planning which ones to post. They didn't expect anyone to be waiting, but Liam and I stood at the end of the railing, and beside us was the attorney, calm and collected, holding a folder thick enough to make my father's smile flicker before he even reached us. My mother slowed first. "Anna, what are you doing here?" My grandmother stepped forward from behind us. She'd insisted on coming, not out of anger, but because she wanted to be present, wanted her voice to matter for once. She wore a navy cardigan and held her purse carefully in front of her, as though bracing for impact. My sister's eyes darted from me to the attorney. "What's this?" The attorney spoke in a professional, even tone. "I'm here on behalf of your mother. We need to discuss the unauthorized use of her assets and the incident at the airport." My father's face drained. "What incident at the airport?" My grandmother answered quietly. "The one where you left me without a ticket." Silence dropped like an anchor. Travelers pushed past us, wheels rolling, conversations rising and fading. But inside our small circle, The air felt thick, unmoving. My sister scoffed. "It was a mistake, Mom. We explained that." "No," my grandmother said, her voice clearer than I'd heard in years. "You explained nothing. You avoided. You minimized. You told me I must be confused, as though confusion were my default state." She looked directly at her eldest granddaughter. I wasn't confused. My father's jaw clenched. "We don't need a lawyer for this." The attorney handed him the envelope. "You do now." He opened it, skimming the contents, documentation of withdrawal statements highlighting inconsistencies, a report of the airport incident, and a formal notice to appear for a mediation hearing. With each page, the lines on his forehead deepened. My sister's purse slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a soft thud, ignored by everyone. "What is this supposed to mean?" she demanded. "It means," I said, stepping forward, "that she won't be dismissed again, not by any of you, not ever." My father looked at me, eyes sharp. "So this is your doing?" "Now," I said, "this is the result of your doing." He bristled. "We've supported this family for decades. Don't you dare." "Supported Emily," I corrected. "Enabled her, celebrated her, protected her. And when it came to Grandma, you decided she was optional, disposable." "That's not fair," my mother whispered. "It's fair," my grandmother said softly. "Fairer than how you've treated me." My sister finally found her voice, brittle and cracking. "Why are we acting like criminals? We helped you with your bills. We've handled your accounts for years. We were doing you a favor." My grandmother's eyes shone, not with tears, but with something like resolve. "You handled my accounts because I trusted you. You used that trust to advance your own plans." My father snapped. "We never took anything she didn't approve." The attorney interjected, steady and unmoved. "Intent will be reviewed during mediation. The pattern is what matters. Control over finances, decision-making without consent, exclusion from travel. These are all indicators of financial exploitation." My sister's composure fractured. "This is ridiculous. Tell them, Dad." But Dad just stared at the papers. His bravado collapsed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to impress anyone. He simply opened a page and held it out for them to see. "This is what I do for a living." My sister leaned in and her face fell. Confidence slid off her features like paint rinsed away by water. "You," she stammered, "you run this?" He nodded once. My father blinked rapidly. "But you said you were in tech." "I am," Liam said, "just not in the way you assumed." My mother put her hand to her chest. "But why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because success doesn't excuse disrespect," he said, "and respect doesn't require success." My grandmother smiled faintly at that. My father tried to recover, trying to pull dignity back around himself like a torn coat. "Still involving lawyers? This is extreme." "What you did was extreme," I said. "Leaving her at the airport was extreme. Using her savings without her full understanding was extreme." My sister folded her arms. "Fine. You want to humiliate us? Congratulations." "This isn't humiliation," I said quietly. "This is accountability." The attorney stepped closer. "You'll need to confirm a date for mediation. It's mandatory." My mother's voice wavered. "What happens if we don't?" "Then the court proceeds without your input," the attorney replied.